Hey, let's talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is Quentin Tarantino's ninth movie, supposedly out of 10, but I've been watching through all the previous eight, and you can watch my other videos about those. But I've been trying to track through some of the trends in Quentin Tarantino's movies and seeing the things that recur over and over again. And I was curious going into this one if those things would continue on into his ninth movie, and they absolutely 100% did. Um, I really like this movie, so I'll tell you some of the things I liked first. It's really not like any other Quentin Tarantino movie. It's very different and unique in a lot of ways. Just the overall tone of it is pretty unexpected, I think. It's really kind of slow moving, kind of carefree. Meandering is a word that popped into my head while I was watching it. It's just kind of going from story to story, these kind of little mini vignettes, which I guess is not that different than something like Pulp Fiction, being in vignettes, or a lot of his other movies. But these are just kind of barely connected, and you're kind of sitting here thinking, how are these going to come together? What's the point of some of these? They're a joy to watch. But knowing Tarantino, I was just waiting for the connection to happen. Um, but it reminded me, the only other movie I could compare it to was Dazed and Confused, because that one, in a very similar way, is just a lot of little stories that are just kind of loosely connected. Um, but again, I really like that about it. It feels so different than any other Tarantino movie that if you took away maybe the last 15 minutes and you told me that somebody else directed this, I would believe you. That said, there's a ton of Tarantino signatures in it, and I really, really love this movie. I can't wait to see it again. But one of the other great things about it is the performances in it. Brad Pitt is incredible, and I generally like Brad Pitt quite a bit, but I'm not usually rapturous for him, and I really, really loved him in this. Thought he was great. Leonardo Dicaprio as well does a great insecure actor. That's sort of the stereotype, is that actors are insecure, and he plays that so believably and so comedically, and in a way that's really, really good. Um, in general, it's just a joy to live in this time period and kind of experience what life might have been like in Hollywood in this time. And I think that's my takeaway, is that I could just like live in this forever. Which I heard a rumor that there's an extended cut that might make it to Netflix someday, so maybe we'll get a little bit more time to bask in the 1969 Hollywood world. Um, let's talk about those recurring themes. So there's some little small references to his previous movies. Bounty hunting is in the show within a show. Sorry, the show within a movie, I guess. The title of it is something about bounty hunting, and Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, has had this show, Western, and it's all about bounty hunting. So that's clearly in line with the bounty hunting going on in Django Unchained, and in The Hateful Eight. There's a lot of bounty talk, which I go into a lot of detail in my previous video. But there's some of his recurring people as well. Leo at this point, Brad Pitt. We get Michael Madsen for just a little part. I'll mention him just because he's my favorite, and he gets just a tiny little spot in one of the shows within a show. Shows within a movie inside of this. One, just not exactly a reference to previous movies, but just kind of a funny inside joke almost, I think, is when Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is about to be on a TV show for just a one-time role, and the TV director is giving him some notes and talking to the costume designer, and says, we want to make it really far out, something you could wear to a party. And then he says, nothing anachronistic, which is really funny because Quentin Tarantino, if you've seen any of his movies, there's a lot of anachronistic things, especially in Django Unchained, or in Inglourious Basterds, those that are set in the past, and some modern type things are happening. Yeah, so that was a kind of a funny little joke. There's something I talked about in Reservoir Dogs, and then also in Django Unchained. There's a great example of it, but I think there's just good script writing. But Quentin Tarantino is good at capturing the vibe in a room, and what I mean by that is the vibe can change or shift really suddenly. In Reservoir Dogs, there's a really tender moment happening, and then somebody comes in who's really high strung and stressed out, and it changes everything. Like everything feels super different, and it's just really effectively done that way. In Django Unchained, someone goes from one room, and we follow them camera-wise into another room, and the vibe is very different and jarring. In this, they don't actually say the word vibe in any of those previous ones, but they say it here. So I've been talking about the vibe in the room, or the vibe of the people, and Kurt Russell's character complains about Brad Pitt's character, saying that his exact quote is, "I don't dig him or his vibe." And so the word of vibe comes directly into it. But then that same idea plays out when he comes to the set anyway, against the will of Kurt Russell's character, and the vibe is really tense. You can just feel it. And then as we are, we've kind of been around Brad Pitt a little bit at this point, his character, but when we get to the set, right at that moment, we learn why Kurt Russell may not have great feelings toward him, and that changes our perception of him too. I won't spoil that at this point. We'll get into spoilers at the end of this video. But our vibe, or the way we feel about Brad Pitt's character's vibe, is different after we learn some significant things from his past. The biggest thing that I've been talking about in all my videos so far is storytelling. So it seems like Quentin Tarantino thinks that stories are the best thing in the world. How can I disagree with that? But not that's a very oversimplified way of saying it, but that stories are what we use to relate to people. We can use them to gain trust. We can use them to hurt people. Stories can be weapons, but they also control our lives. We attach ourselves to stories. We think about Christoph Waltz's character in Django Unchained, who just was swept up in the story of saving Broomhilda because he's German, and that's, a famous story for him. He had to do it like that. That made him risk his life to help a friend that he just met. And in this, storytelling is like in every part of it. So first of all, it's set in Hollywood, which is a town that's literally built on stories. And that's the whole point of the movie industry is, storytelling and all of that. This movie really celebrates that. So it celebrates the filmmakers, and a little bit more on that is that there's kind of a tradition of movies about movies. Since movies have been around, people have been making movies about movie makers, and this fits in really well with that. So many of those types of movies are really cynical, or can be really cynical, and see the business side of things, and there's some of that here, but ultimately I think this one is pretty pure about, what we're doing here. Telling stories is a really good thing, and the people doing this have the people in this movie mostly have really pure motives for wanting to do that, it seems like. And I think Tarantino is showing this is really good. We're telling stories for a living. This is great. And we get some of the movie making people that aren't always shown in these types of things. We get the hair people, hair and makeup, costume designers, like a TV director. We see, directors are a big deal, but TV directors, we don't often think about what their job is like. And we see one in this, there's a great scene with a TV director. One of my favorite things about this, though, too, is so we spent a lot of time with Leonardo Dicaprio, who is an actor. His career is a little bit in flux. He's questioning what's going to happen next. He's very insecure. He's questioning all the time his acting decisions. He's beating himself up when he doesn't do well. But he kind of gets to reconnect with his love of acting and like his craft in a really interesting way. And that's with this little girl on the set who is studying acting and is just very like a pure, innocent vessel. And she's like, an actor should do this and that and that. And, you get the sense that he knows this, but he's kind of seeing it through childlike eyes, reconnecting with the kind of the basics of what an actor does and this part of storytelling. So I think in using a child to do that, Tarantino is kind of pulling us towards the purity of storytelling and movie making. And it's just really funny too, because Tarantino or Leonardo DiCaprio's character interacts with her several times, and it makes for some laughs for sure. In some of his other movies too, we see how stories can control our lives, or we can get swept up into, if we think we're part of a good story, we're more likely to be passionate about what we're doing, I think. We all tell ourselves stories all the time. So there's just lots of different layers of storytelling here. And there's lots of layers of storytelling in this movie. We have Leonardo DiCaprio, an actor in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and within that, there's all these different shows and things. And that's a lot of the joy of this, is seeing fictional shows, but seeing kind of the industry as it was and the types of things being produced at that time. And it's almost like Tarantino got to just make fan fiction for 1960s Hollywood and make all these new shows. So I wonder if we do get an extended cut of this, it's just going to have a lot of more of the things they shot for these fictionalized TV shows, which are so fun. Like, really one of the highlights of it was seeing those things that they cooked up. But stories especially control his life. Rick Dalton, as he's thinking about his career and the types of stories that he chooses to tell, changes the way he's perceived, and so that really is controlling his life in a big way. So as I thought about kind of that dazed and confused thing I mentioned, where the stories are only kind of barely related, and I'll get into spoilers in just a second, but not yet. And you think, why? What's the point of some of these? They don't have a huge narrative draw towards the ending of the movie. They all seem a little bit. Someone could watch this and say, "What was the point?" Yeah, like, what was the point of that whole thing? You could almost say, which we probably say about every movie we watch, is try to figure out what's the point of this. But basically, I think the significance of these smaller stories is just to show the humanity of each one. So we see a struggling actor in his trailer beating himself up, and he's pitiful in a lot of ways, but we can empathize with the way he's feeling to some degree, and it's funny, but you also, I think you have to love him in that moment. Like, he cares so much about what he's doing, and you see all these little stories. I think they have a lot of just human moments like that. And I think the point of it is to see the humanity of the people in this story. I think that movies, maybe better than other art forms, can capture that humanity. So there's a scholar who calls film the seventh art form. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'll put it in the caption. But the point of that was that it takes the other six primary art forms and it combines them all into one. So we have music, we have visual art, we have performance, all these things in one art form. And I think that you can, personally for me at least, and I think for the masses, you can read a book and get at humanity, but there's something about seeing it play out in front of you on screen that just does it better than anything else. And I think that is, obviously Tarantino, I think, probably is of that opinion. This is the medium he's telling stories in, but I think in this movie in particular, he is making that point, that movies are, they move our spirits in a way that maybe other things don't, and they can make us feel that connection to our fellow man, which I think is really cool. Let's talk about the ending. So spoilers are coming. Spoiler warning, spoiler warning. So Quentin Tarantino has a trend of revising history. if you've seen this, then you know that happens here as well. And if you know anything about movie history and Hollywood history. I think this movie has a lot of parallels to Inglourious Basterds. Spoilers for Inglourious Basterds as well. But both of them have a kind of a revisionist history ending. Both of them have like an out group or like a bad guy group. So in Inglourious Basterds, we have the Nazis. In this, we have Brad Pitt in a lot of the spots talking about hippies. And we have the Charles Manson cult, and he has a certain hatred towards hippies you can kind of sense. And I think that's actually another parallel, is that Brad Pitt is in both of these. In Inglourious Basterds, he is the primary force of, we're going to be cruel to the Nazis, they're going to fear us, and all of that. In this one, he mentioned several times something about hippies, and he kind of says it under his breath and whatever, but he has quite a disdain for hippies, as he terms them. I think both of these movies and other movies of Tarantino's do this as well, but they kind of pull at our prejudices. So you shouldn't hate anybody, but what about Nazis? What about criminals? What about racists? And can they then have a hero who's fighting this, and we can cheer for them no matter what? But what if they're cruel and unusual punishment? What if they are terrible people? Like, I'm thinking about Kurt Russell in The Hateful Eight, who's taken down this villain, but he's a real jerk. And how can we fully support that? And I think it just makes us question our prejudices and the way we think about violence and the law and morality and the relationships of things there. And this movie, I think, does that too. So as I was thinking through, like, why revise this story? Why choose this story to change the history of in this movie? In Inglourious Basterds and in Django Unchained, there's a lot of revenge going on, against Nazis, against racists. And so those things seem more relevant somehow or something. But I was thinking through this, and I don't know the answer, so I would love comments to help me better understand this too. But I have a kind of a theory. But it's not like we're all sitting around as a society thinking about the Manson murders and, demanding justice. Whereas for racial tension, absolutely, that's something that's happening on a big scale today. So anyway, I think the two reasons that I can come up with are this. One is it really works very well on a story level. So we have all these kind of disconnected, loosely connected stories, and a lot of them are featuring Sharon Tate. And so we, as the audience, are thinking, okay, she's going to be the key that kind of brings these all together, and about her death that must be going to happen at the end of this movie. And so it works to pull the rug out from under us, as Tarantino loves to do, because we are expecting one ending, and that's not the ending that we get. And even though I know Tarantino loves these surprise endings, I still was very surprised by this. I was like, wait, which house are they going to? It just doesn't play out the way you expect. So we keep wondering when she's going to connect with the rest of them. And so just from a suspense level, it's very effective. The second theory that I can come up with about why is that the general public may not think about Sharon Tate's killing very often, the Manson murders. It's not something that, that's in the news very much these days, but I think that it is something that Tarantino thinks about a lot. So if you think about what happened that night, you can look at it as sort of an affront to filmmaking, to storytelling, and to kind of the purity of what Tarantino loves is people who are able to tell these stories and change lives with it. The Manson murders were a mark against that, and a big sort of stain on the history of storytelling in Hollywood. And so I think it is a spot where Tarantino looked at history and said, here's a way I can get into 1960s Hollywood and make this fan fiction-esque story about actors in this time and have so much fun there, and then have a very surprising and violent, gleefully violent ending, and get revenge on people who attacked Hollywood. basically. That's my theory. Let me know what you think. You can go back and watch my previous videos on Instagram, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, bye.